Well, thank you, Jeff, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you for inviting me here. It's wonderful to be a part of this celebration. This is a great event. When I was invited and I leaped at the opportunity to come, what came to my mind were a number of connections between things that are relevant to tonight's event. I'm going to speak for just a short time, but what I do want to talk about are some of those connections. The first are personal, so I hope that you will pardon me if I begin with a couple of personal connections to tonight's event. This has been an important night for me in the work that I do. For many years, I have been deciding cases involving provisions of the Bill of Rights, and I have been looking at little pocket versions of the pocket constitutions like this. I have taken it on faith that their version of the Bill of Rights is actually what was adopted by Congress and ratified by the states. So today I had the opportunity to look at an original and to verify that there really aren't any discrepancies. So this has been important to me. Another personal connection is that in 1990, I was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, a wonderful court which is headquartered right across the street by President George H.W. Bush, and I am grateful to him for giving me that opportunity. As a result of that, I spent a lot of very satisfying days in this historic city and in this historic part of the city. And I learned something interesting to me personally during my confirmation period, not a period that I would like to relive, but it had a few high points. A newspaper hired a genealogist to do a genealogy of my family, and one of the things that was discovered was that my paternal grandmother and my father, who was then 6 months old, came to the United States through Philadelphia. So they landed here just a short distance away at the port of Philadelphia. And so Philadelphia is meaningful to me for those reasons. Now, those are just personal connections. What I want to talk about are connections between what we are celebrating here today, which is the exhibit of an original copy of the Bill of Rights, and today's events. And what I want to talk about are connections between the Bill of Rights and two great historic American cities, and also connections between the Bill of Rights and a president. Now, you can probably guess which cities and which president I am going to talk about. The first of the cities is New York, which of course is connected to this event because the New York Public Library has very graciously loaned its copy of the Bill of Rights to be exhibited here, and I'm sure we all are all very grateful to that great institution for allowing that to happen. But there is another very important connection to the city of New York. New York was our nation's capital in 1789 when Congress adopted the amendments which later became the Bill of Rights and sent those amendments to the states for ratification. So New York City can claim the title as the title of the birthplace of the Bill of Rights. The other city, of course, is Philadelphia. That's where we are. That's where this copy of the Bill of Rights is going to be exhibited in the National Constitution Center. But Philadelphia also has deeper connections to the Bill of Rights. Most of these, I think, have already been mentioned, but I think they bear repetition. First of all, the seed that became the Bill of Rights was planted here in Philadelphia in 1776 when the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. As we all know, and as David Rubenstein reminded us, the Declaration of Independence proclaims that every person has certain unalienable rights. And the Bill of Rights codifies the promise of the Declaration of Independence. It codifies unalienable rights that are precious to us as Americans. The Bill of Rights also represents the completion of the work that was done across the street in Independence Hall during the hot summer of 1787. That, of course, was where the body of our Constitution was adopted and sent to the states for ratification. Now, we all know the story. When the body of the Constitution was completed, there were those who thought that it was not complete, that the new, more powerful federal government that was created by the Constitution would threaten the liberty of the people, and therefore they thought it was imperative that there be explicit guarantees of rights in the Constitution. On the other hand, there were those who thought that the structure of the new government framed by the Constitution, the limitation of federal authority, the separation of powers, the system of dual sovereignty, provided better protection and sufficient protection for the rights of the people. Both of those groups were powerful, and ultimately what occurred was a compromise. The Constitution was ratified, but as David Rubenstein reminded us, it was ratified on the understanding that a Bill of Rights would be promptly framed and adopted, and that is what happened. And today we can see that both of those groups were perceptive. On the one hand, the government has grown to a size that the founding generation could never have imagined, and the Bill of Rights is vitally needed to keep the federal government and the state governments in check, to make sure that they do not violate precious individual rights. At the same time, however, without the governmental structure that the Constitution created, the Bill of Rights would be like an arm without a body. Constitutional provisions protecting individual rights are worse than useless if they are not backed up by a governmental structure to enforce those rights. And that brings me to the third connection between the Bill of Rights and the city of Philadelphia. By the time the first 10 amendments were ratified, the national capital had moved from New York to Philadelphia, and it was here, right across the street, that the Supreme Court heard its first cases. It had met in a very brief session in New York and adopted some internal rules, but after that, the capital moved to Philadelphia, the Supreme Court moved to Philadelphia, the Supreme Court heard its first cases across the street in the summer of 1791, and it was not long after that, in the mid-1790s, that the court began to hear arguments about the provisions of the Bill of Rights. They were put into operation in that way. This brings me to the president to whom I referred, and I don't think it is a mystery who I'm talking about. I'm talking about President George Herbert Walker Bush. What is his connection here? Well, first of all, of course, we have witnessed the unveiling of the President George H.W. Bush Gallery, and so that is a connection. But there are two others that I want to talk about. The first is something of a curiosity, and it relates to things that have been discussed. The amendments that we call the Bill of Rights were sent to the states for ratification on September 25th, 1789. Congress sent 12 amendments to the states, but the states originally ratified only 10, amendments 13 through 12. The first of the amendments that was, and it is certainly true, as we've been reminded, that the first two really don't seem to fit in with what we know as the Bill of Rights. The first one, which concerned the composition of the House of Representatives, is still out there. It has not been ratified and probably never will be. The second, which also does not fit, as we were reminded, with the provisions of the Bill of Rights, however, had a different history. It was finally ratified by the requisite number of states on May 7th, 1992, 200 plus years after it was originally sent out by Congress. It has to do with congressional pay. It provides that if Congress gives itself a pay raise, it won't take effect until another election. But in any event, we know who was President of the United States on May 7, 1992, and that was President George H.W. Bush. So that is a connection between him and the Bill of Rights. The second also concerns a date, but it is much more than a curiosity. President Bush was in office on the 200th anniversary of the ratification of the Bill of Rights. That was December 12, 1991. And he took that occasion to point out something that is very important, namely the connection between our Bill of Rights and the rights of people everywhere. For a long time, what our Constitution gave us, a declaration of rights that actually had teeth, and that is what is unique about our Bill of Rights. It actually has teeth. It is actually put into operation. It is actually enforced. For a long time, that concept was an oddity. For more than 150 years, the idea that a legislative act is void if it infringes the right of the people found very few adherents anywhere else in the world. But World War II, where President George H.W. Bush fought with great distinction as a pilot, changed that. The enormity of the evil that was perpetrated by the Third Reich, often under the veneer of legality, prompted people throughout the world to rethink the whole question of rights. And the American idea of an enforceable Bill of Rights began to catch on. All of the former Axis powers after World War II adopted new democratic constitutions that protect human rights and provide for judicial review of the constitutionality of government acts. And then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and of the Warsaw Pact during President Bush's term in office, the newly liberated nations of Eastern Europe followed suit. In his proclamation on the 200th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, on December 12, 1991, President Bush noted that, quote, "The principles enshrined in the Bill of Rights have inspired the advance of freedom around the globe." When President Bush issued that proclamation, a great event in the history of human rights was just 3 days away, and I'm sure that this event was on President Bush's mind when he issued that proclamation. On December 15, 1991, the Soviet Union was officially dissolved, and President Bush was able to say in his proclamation that, quote, "Today we stand closer than ever to achieving universal respect for human rights." Well, 23 years later, that end, universal respect for human rights, may not seem quite so close as it was in 1991. But still, the promise of the Bill of Rights endures. And I hope that this display of the Bill of Rights will help, if only in a small way, to move us closer to that goal. When visitors look at this document, I hope the experience will lead to a greater appreciation of our constitutional rights, and that it will inspire the public to work to preserve those rights. Constitutional rights, the precious freedoms that are protected by the Bill of Rights, are always fragile. They are always threatened. The judiciary and others in government have a role to play in protecting those rights, but as a great jurist, a New Yorker named Learned Hand once wrote, "Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can save it." May this exhibit fan the flame of liberty in the hearts of all that see it, all who see it in the upcoming years. Thank you very much.